So my aim here is to make the one video that portrait photographers need to watch to understand how focal length works in portraiture. Portrait photographers all have their favourite focal length for doing portraits on. My favourite is the 50 for reasons I'll go into later. Really, there's no correct answer to what the ideal focal length for a portrait is. It's about deciding what you want the relationship between your subject and the environment to be. So now I'm going to go to the park, I'm going to show you some focal lengths in real time and talk you through them a little bit. So this shot is at 16mm, which is the widest I can go, and for consistency, all the following shots are going to be at f8. So the wider the lens gets, the more context you get around the subject, and the deeper the depth of field is. The depth of field is basically the distance between the nearest thing in focus and the furthest thing in focus. So you can see inside the frame there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and there's an awful lot of detail, and that's what you get when you shoot a portrait on a wide-angle lens. So this shot is at 50mm, which is pretty close to what the human eye sees, so it's a quite natural feeling balance of subject and environment. You can see that the context around me has shrunk a little bit, the lines are getting a little bit straighter. For me, at f8, there's a little bit too much background detail in it now. I would personally like to do this shot on more like f2.5, but you can't make a video about everything. We're now at 100mm, and the longer your lens gets, the more the subject pops out of the picture, the shallower the depth of field gets, the straighter the geometry becomes, the less context you include. And that's why this is a nice length for most portrait photographers to use. So we've now doubled the focal length to 200mm, and even at f8, the background is about as compressed as it gets, and we've really knocked an awful lot of context out of this picture now. A common thing to do in my local news days, when I didn't have any control over my background and I had to do a nice portrait, was to shoot it at something like 200mm to just knock the background out completely and turn it into soup. The only issue with using focal lengths like this for portraiture is how far away you have to stand away from your subject. It makes communication pretty difficult. If you want to give your subject a bit of direction at 200mm, you're going to be shouting. So here's a quick recap of what all the focal lengths look like. 16mm, 50mm, 100mm, 200mm. You decide which of these you're into. They've all got a place. Personally, I like to do portraits at about 50mm. I think it's a nice expressive focal length. If I'm doing volume photography, like headshots for businesses, I like to do them around 100mm. I only use really wide or really long focal lengths if the brief specifically asks for that look. As ever, thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. If you want, you can subscribe, and I'm also on Instagram at PhilTraganPhoto. Looking forward to hearing from you in the comments section.